Welcome along everyone to one of the last panels for today, called Self-Organising and the City, Stories from Athens and Dublin. My name is Tom, I'm from the Workers' Solidarity Movement, and we're delighted to see such a huge crowd here, so well done on turning up. Just to begin with, some bad news to begin with. Katrina Nasioka, who was involved in the autonomous movements over in Greece, in Athens, her mum took ill just this week. She's well now, but Katrina was unable to travel for today. So she sends her apologies, and hopefully we may organise her visit at a later point, perhaps in the autumn or maybe for next year's book fair. But she sends her love and solidarity from Athens and wishes you all the best with tonight's or this evening's session. So if people were here to listen about stories from Athens, please feel free to leave now if you were exclusively here for Athens, and we won't hold it against you. Okay, so that leaves us then really talking about self-organising and in the city of Dublin. And I'm delighted that we have two activists and squatters from both Grangegorman and the Barricade, who are a couple of years' experience of squatting in Dublin over the last number of years. So we have Zoe from the Barricades Inn, and we also have Jenny from Grangegorman. And I think Jenny's going to speak first, then Zoe, and then we're going to open it up for questions. And you know, this isn't kind of like, none of us are presenting ourselves as experts up here, so it's going to be really up to yourselves. Like, there are lots of people here with lots of different experiences of squatting, so we hope that you'll all contribute in that discussion then. But I'm just going to hand it over to Jenny, so and I hope you all make her feel welcome.
Hi. So basically, in Dublin, compared to maybe other countries in Europe, there isn't such a strong tradition of a squatting movement. In the 1960s, there was the Dublin Housing Action Committee, which basically squatted buildings. There were protests against housing shortages. And they squatted buildings and then moved families into them. And then since then, there's been kind of sporadic squatting actions. So in the mid-2000s, there was the Disco Squat and the Magpie House. And then since just after the economic crash in 2008, the squatting movement in Ireland's been kind of slowly building and growing. In the beginning it was really, really small, so usually there was only one house with maybe 5 or 8 people living in it, and it was always referred to as the squat. But over time it's just been building and building, and I'd say there's maybe 60 people squatting in Dublin now, maybe. I don't know, it's hard to know. Grangegorman, when Grangegorman, when it was initially squatted, it wasn't kept secret, but for a long time it kind of kept a lower profile than what we would have wanted it to. It wasn't as visible, and I guess because there wasn't this tradition of squatting in Ireland. There was a lot of people just didn't really believe that squatting was a thing that you could do. It wasn't possible. Like, people would say it time and time again, like, "Oh no, you can't squat in Ireland. You can't squat in Ireland." And thanks to the work of the people who've been involved in the movement, and there are some people who've been really amazing, who've done a lot of work, and who really need to be commended. That's starting to change. It's been a really huge learning curve for everyone. So, as we kind of borrow tactics from abroad and then increasingly develop our own tactics, we grow stronger and more powerful. So now spaces like the Barricade can open up and just be visible from the get-go. So I'll just start kind of talking about Grangegorman. So it was first squatted in August of 2013. It's a large compound in Dublin 7, so it's just up the road there. It's got 3 houses, 3 warehouses, and some office space. There's around 30 people living there. There's a community garden, a communal kitchen, children's play area, skate park, art studio. There's lots of free events have been held there. Tonight there's a spoken word night on. The space was abandoned at different stages over a period of about 12 years. Prior to it being squatted, I think it was most recently in use, one of the buildings was most recently in use about 5 years ago. It was bought over different stages by a property developer called Pascal Conroy over the space of a few years. He put in a planning application for apartments in 2007, which was rejected.
Can you speak up? We can't hear you here.
Okay.
Sorry.
He put in a planning application for apartments in 2007 that was rejected. Then he went bankrupt, and NAMA took over the property loans in 2012. For people who don't know, NAMA was established in 2009. It's a state agency that basically bought all the loans from property speculation off the banks, the bad loans, and then so they acquired the debt for Grangegorman after he went bankrupt and passed them on to the receivers, Ernst & Young, to sell them. So prior to the most recent eviction attempt, there were 2 previous eviction attempts that were successfully resisted. The first one was in October 2013. So basically the guards came and knocked on the door, and somebody let them inside the building. After they looked at people's passports, I think it was decided by everyone that they'd just leave the building. Coming back to what I was saying about learning curves, obviously people aren't going to let the guards into the building again, but yeah, people basically just left the house and then had a meeting about it and decided to go back, and they were left alone. Then there was another one in May 2014 where they were hired goons came, tried to kick in the door and intimidate people, and a call out was made, and around 50 people pretty promptly showed up on the scene and started playing live music and just recording the heavies. And I guess the heavies just sort of realised that they couldn't really do much with so many people there, and the fact that they were being recorded and stuff, so they just left. So then the most recent eviction happened on March the 23rd. So at around 6:30, I was woken up by the sound of banging, and basically we looked outside the window and there was construction workers angle grinding down the gate. They got inside the compound, and I'd say maybe there was 50 people there. So that consisted of hired private security, guards and construction workers. As far as I know, the guards had no lawful right to be there because it's a civil matter, so they shouldn't have been there in the first place. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, they tried to hand us these legal papers, but they didn't really say anything, and the original papers were actually addressed to the wrong houses, and because they hadn't been in the court, they just didn't mean anything. I think that they entered the building and tried to evict us on the assumption that we were weaker than we were, and they get in there and they just kind of like trash us about and kick us out by the middle of the morning. But that didn't really work out so well for them, because we put up a really strong resistance, and because we did a call out, people, our friends and people from the community responded really, really quickly. You know, with the use of social media, because Solidarity Times were posting pretty quickly about it, and with smartphones, I really think that made a huge difference to how that day worked out, because I think that if the security company and the guards hadn't known that they were being recorded, I think we could have ended up really, really badly hurt. So that went on until about midnight, and it got like increasingly heavy-handed in the evening. The security company was resorting to throwing rocks at people, hitting them with metal poles, and eventually they ended up running people. We tried to block one of their vans from getting out, because we said they were welcome to leave by foot, but they couldn't take their vehicles. And that resulted in them driving their van into us, and somebody actually went under the wheels. Fortunately, nobody was seriously hurt. There were definitely injuries, but nobody was seriously hurt. So the guards were then forced to kind of enter into negotiations with us after that point, where they basically got the all the workers and the security company out of the compound and got them to leave, and when we were able to re-enter the compound after that. And then since then, the case has been up in the High Court, and an injunction was granted.
There's a lot of people trying to get in. I don't know what you should do from
Sorry, there's a few seats here, so if like 5 or 10 people from the back want to come up, like right now, and sit down, that would make a lot more room for people. And sorry, I'm just like, and also like if you can't hear the speaker, please like move your hands up, like as in like louder, because especially when people come in, the door opens and it's hard for people to hear. So like don't be shy and like say louder if you can't hear it. And yeah, come on up. There's like there's seating area here.
I've been there many times. So.
Yeah, there's a little bit of space up here, so on the ground. Yeah, you fit more people in at the back as well. Against the wall. Would you mind standing up?
No.
Only about 5 minutes.
Okay, grant.
There's like 2 or 3 or 4 spots right here.
Yeah.
Right here.
Okay. So yeah, since then the case has been up in the High Court. An injunction was passed to be put in place for the 4th of May. Basically, we knew the injunction was going to be passed, so we were pretty amazed that they'd given us that much time. So, right, once we're working on the other assumption that that the eviction will go ahead, but after that happens, the property will continue to remain abandoned and undeveloped, and it could take years to sell the property and obtain planning permission. So if we look at this then in the context of the housing crisis, the number of people seeking emergency accommodation in the last few years has just is just continuing to rise. Families with young children are being kicked out of their homes and left to fend for themselves. The price of rent is soaring, and mortgages are just being made completely unaffordable. Living in the city is not possible for a lot of people on lower incomes anymore. And at the same time, we just see on every street there's numerous empty properties that are being intentionally left to slip into a state of dereliction. So, yeah, there's the reason for the current housing crisis is people are saying that it's because of a shortage of housing, but that's just obviously not true. In 2013, there was 39,000 unoccupied private households in Dublin. There's an ever widening gap between the rich and the poor in Ireland. There's a decrease. The decrease in the numbers on the live register is, it's being highly exaggerated because it doesn't take into account the number of people who've emigrated or have been forced to take on free labour schemes like JobsBridge. The rent's continuing to spiral out of control, but rent allowance caps remain completely insufficient, and cuts to social welfare payments are pushing people into poverty and into social alienation. So those under 26 are receiving decreased social welfare. So people aged between 18 and to 24 only get €100 a week. Loan parent payments for people with children over 7 have been cut. And families are at the biggest at-risk group for homelessness in Ireland. So in February 2015, there was 371 families, which included 803 dependents seeking emergency accommodation in Dublin. There's a myth that that we all need to take a financial hit because of the bank bailout, but it's completely untrue because Ireland now has 90,000 millionaires, and yet every week more and more families are being made homeless. So the way I see it is the housing crisis is a direct result of neoliberalism. Neoliberal policies allow competitive markets to operate without restrictions across society. Housing is a basic human need. It's become highly commodified, and it's being pushed into a highly competitive marketplace, which is based on property speculation. So what is considered public space and public goods is rapidly changing. So physical spaces are being increasingly controlled through surveillance, like CCTV, and health and safety regulation. So places are being, like independent spaces are being shut down because of fire safety and stuff. What we've previously taken for granted as public goods like water, education, healthcare, transport, they're becoming increasingly privatised. Housing is being increasingly portrayed as a privilege rather than a right. So it's not really just a personal struggle about, me or like the squatters finding a house or resisting losing our house. It's kind of part of a worldwide movement that's resisting how neoliberalism is encroaching on all aspects of our lives.
If any of Ireland's 90,000 millionaires are here, they might make themselves known. Thanks very much. And next up we have Zoe from the Barricades Inn, and to talk about what's going on there. Okay. Somebody suggested that you might stand up, but I don't know.
I'm pretty okay at talking so loudly, so I might just sit if that's okay. But if I'm not talking loudly enough, just like tell me. I'll go loud. So I guess a bit of a background before I talk about the project that I'm involved in now is that first time I came to Ireland was about 3.5 years ago, and when I was passing through Dublin, I was only supposed to stay for a couple days, and I ended up. And I asked people where to go if you're interested in radical politics, and I heard about Schumer's Free, and I went there, and I also heard that there was one squat in Dublin, so I was determined to find that squat to stay there, to sleep for the night. And I couldn't find them the first few days, but then the vegan cafe on Wednesday came around, and they were there, and I went and stayed at their place for a few nights, and then one of them said, hey, you should just live with us, and then it did for a while, for a few months, and I learned a lot about squatting then, and about the people here, and I fell in love with Dublin, and I ended up staying that time in Dublin 4.5 months, and then left to go traveling, and when I was traveling, decided that I wanted to settle down somewhere for a while and work on longer-term projects, because that's hard to do when you're traveling. So I came back 2 Septembers ago, and I ended up, at that time, I don't think, there was like one squat that had been going, but then kind of got some kind of a rent deal with the people who owned it. But that was the only thing going at that point, as far as I remember. And then we started squatting Grangegorman together, and that was just one house, then 2 houses, and then 3 houses, and then eventually people spread into the warehouses. Then I moved into another squat, and then the project that I'm working on now is called the Barricade. It's a squatted anarchist social center and info shop. It used to be a hotel. It's 4 stories. The bottom 2 stories are social center and info shop, and the top 2 stories are residency. It's run by a collective that includes both residents and people outside who want to be involved in the project. But just the reason I give a background is to kind of, because I'm like actually really amazed and impressed by how much the squatting movement has grown in Ireland, and how like people outside of Ireland, people all over Europe are talking about it, and people from the States are coming over because they heard about it, and that's really cool to be a part of something like that. And that's because so many people have worked so hard to make it that way, and that's through things like open practical squatters days, and events like the International Squatters Convergence, which we hosted last September at Grangegorman, and other things along those lines. To talk about the Barricade, we've been squatting it for like a month and a half. We had just had our first big open day on Wednesday. It's now going to be open every Wednesday from 4 to 9, and Saturdays from 12 to 2. We have a info shop that has a library with a few hundred books in it and a bunch of zines, and we've just created a checkout system for people to actually be able to use the library. Those books, most of those books came from, the info shop is called the Bad Books Info Shop, and that's because 10 years ago, whatever it was, the Magpie Squat, which was a squat on Leeson Street that lasted about 8 months, they also had a library, and they called it the Bad Books Library, so we've kind of taken over that name. And as well, in this space, we have a venue room that's called the Disco Room, and that's kind of in honor of the Disco as well, because it's so close. It's really nice to have those things kind of to look back to, and those people to talk to about kind of what kind of tactics they used, and learn from that too. A lot of us who are involved in the collective used to be involved in, or still are, and used to be involved in the Shomra's Free Collective. Shomra is closing down this month, and it's a really amazing project that's run for 10 years and has done a lot for a lot of people. And that's okay, things change, and things move and turn into different things, and that's kind of what's happening. A lot of people for a lot of reasons, Shomra's closing down, but one of the big reasons is because we don't want to put energy, and most of us don't want to put energy anymore into paying rent to a landlord when we don't agree with the concept of rent, and the concept of private property. And it's really great to feel empowered and feel like we have this support network built up now, and like Dublin is right to be able to do a project kind of at this scale, like we're doing at the Barricade Inn, which is so central, I think it's also important. I think another reason why Shomra is closing down is because a lot of people who have been involved over the years, and people in Dublin in general, and people in cities, kind of forget why it's so important to have autonomous social centers in cities. And I think that these spaces kind of serve as like established, sustained spaces where we can spread a radical critique of society and like have these hubs of revolutionary activity. Because, you know, once you're involved in the activist or anarchist circles, you can move on to different people's houses or to pubs and stuff, but it's really important to have these public spaces that are making these statements, you know, and especially for new people who want to get involved, and for people who are passing through to find out like what's going on, and for groups to meet up and network. I think it's really important to have these spaces. Another thing that in terms of the importance of autonomous spaces, and within the context of squatting too, the spaces like this provide really obvious examples of alternatives to capitalism. And that doesn't mean that it's outside of capitalism, because you can't do that within our society these days, you know, but you can do things like host free workshops. Fucking crap, sorry. Host free workshops, have a bike workshop where instead of you know, your kind of normal financial transaction of like, oh, I need to fix my bike, so I'm going to go to the bike shop and pay this person to fix my bike. You go, and nobody's going to fix it for you. They're going to teach you how to do it. And that means kind of sharing knowledge and sharing skills. And that's a really important part of resisting capitalism too, you know, is making it so that there's not these specialized people that you have to go to where you give them your money and they do it for you, but you're doing it yourself, and it's empowering each other to do that. And then there's stuff like vegan cafes or gigs where everything is suggested donation, so it's accessible to everybody, and you give if you can, but if you don't, you're just as welcome as anybody else. So it's kind of having these activities and having these activities where you come in and your like presence there isn't based on the financial transaction that you're going to have with somebody, but it's based on the relationship that you're going to build with them and what you can give to each other and mutual aid, and that's really powerful. In terms of residential squatting and like squatting buildings that turn into autonomous spaces as well, kind of in the last few decades since in political squatting in Europe, there are these trends that have built up, and it doesn't mean that it exists in every squat, but there's an underlying pattern that I think a lot of people don't know about if you haven't been to squats either, and that's why I want to talk about them. Is stuff like skipping, which is, probably people know this, but going to the bins and getting food out of them, and doing stuff like skipping and bringing it back to the squat means that we have food that's communal, where like if somebody walks in and they're hungry and they don't live there, you don't have like, you know, your cabinet that like you paid for and so you deserve that food and nobody else can take it. Any food is everybody's food, and so there's this really good sense of communality that exists within the squat. Then there's stuff like meetings and consensus decision making, and these are things that we kind of take for granted that we don't even think about anymore, but it's obvious things that are part of how we organize our lives and how we organize who we live with and how we make decisions and everything. In terms of the sense of communality in squatting, I think that this is something that's become, these are like part of the tradition of political squatting, but I think that they're also something that's inherent in squatting in itself, because to squat, not all of the time, it depends on the reason that you're doing it, but to squat, you often are stronger in numbers. Like if the guards come or the owner comes and you have loads of people inside, as well as like an eviction resistance support network built up, there are people coming outside who are filming people, there's this really, really strong sense of solidarity, and that has a lot to do with the fact that there is kind of a common identified enemy, so whether you want it or not, like you have something that ties you all together. I guess one thing that I'd like to talk, I'd like there to be more discussions on in Dublin in general, and in the world in general, but in Dublin, that I think squatting kind of pressures you to think about, is creating alternatives to dealing with conflict, because in the way our society is structured, we often don't know, we don't have kind of processes set up to deal with conflict ourselves. We're taught and expected to, when we have issues, go to the guards or go to state institutions to solve them. And figuring out how to envision a world without guards, without cops at all, is a really difficult thing to do. But I think squatting kind of forces you to do that because you're in this kind of like extra legal position, and it's and that kind of leads you to come up with things like accountability processes and safer spaces. But I think it'd be great to maybe have more discussions on how to deal with issues within the squat, but as well as outside of the squat that don't include calling the guards. And I think that these are the kinds of discussions that we need to have. An example that I've seen of this is or that I've heard about is I think it's in Santa Cruz, California. They have this thing called the Blue Light Project, which is, I don't know who exactly organized it or how it got started, but I know that the Anarchist Social Center or Anarchist Coffee Shop Library thing is involved in it. And it's this idea where you do some kind of process and you get vouched for, and then you get this blue light and you put it at your front porch. And when people are in dangerous situations at their home, most likely or most commonly to do with domestic violence, for example, and they need to leave but they have nowhere else to go, they look for these houses with blue lights and know that these are like vouched for safer spaces that they can go to where they can find support and help. And it'd be great to figure out more processes like these that we can do kind of as a community and like larger as a city, you know? And so, yeah, I'd be into talking about that more with people too and exploring that. But I think that squatting kind of encourages us to figure things out like this, to figure things out where, figure out things that require us to take control over our lives, you know, when we have so little control, when most of us are forced into spending our days at work making money to pay for our food, to pay for fixing our bike and things like that, you know. I guess one of the last things I want to talk about is that people in like the public discourse of squatting and why we squat. There's a lot of different points that are often brought up. Most commonly is the need for housing and the fact that like everybody deserves and needs a house, and this is a right that we all have, so we should just take it if they're not going to give it to us. And otherwise we should ask for it. You know, we're kind of like campaigning for them to give us housing. But in the meanwhile, we're going to take it if they're not going to give it to us. I think that that's a really, really important argument to make. But I also think that we shouldn't lose focus of the fact that we're squatting because we disagree with the basic notion of private property, you know? I was listening to the talk from the Dublin Anarchist Bookfair last year, and I think that that's something that at that talk wasn't talked about enough, is like why a lot of us are squatting. And I think that squatting is realistically, to me, the most salient symbol of opposition to capitalism and to private property, because you don't see that very often. You don't see opposition to those things kind of in your face. And I think the Barricade and Grangegorman as well are really good examples of like huge projects that have gone really public and that have got people kind of, it's challenging how people think of squatting and how people think of private property. And that's a difficult thing to do because people don't want to and don't imagine kind of challenging these accepted truths that we have, like private property. And people don't even remember or don't know about, a lot of people don't know about things like the Enclosure Acts of the 1500s in England, when these like common lands that everybody owned, or nobody owned, whichever way you looked at it, got taken over by the state. And so now every single piece of land that you can see, that you can like touch on the ground, that's owned by somebody, and that's not even questioned, you know? And I think that it's useful to try and question those things again. And I think that huge projects like this that are so central, that like really publicly use words like, yeah, we're fucking squatting, and like this is our space because we're using it, not because we have a piece of paper that says so, that challenges that notion. And think that's all I got. I wanted to say is we have a stall outside right over there for the Barricade Inn. We've got these little pamphlets that we made, that Shane made, that are really beautiful, that talks a bit more about kind of different events that we have going on. So we were looking for like more people to get involved and more people to put on events, and just feel free to come chat to us about it.
Just before we go on to questions, comments from the floor, if there are any millionaires in the audience, the donation buckets are upstairs. But if there aren't any millionaires, we'd appreciate a few quid anyway, just to help with the running costs, the hiring the venue, and so on. Secondly, you should see feedback forms going around the room at this stage, or maybe they're already in your seats. We'd appreciate if you fill those out, let us know what you think about the book fair, and so on. And Max here is, if you can send them up at the end of the talk, Max will be taking responsibility for them. So the other point is, of course, if we can't dance, it's not our revolution. So there is dancing and music in the Voodoo Lounge at 8 o'clock. The Voodoo Lounge is just across the Lewis line, quite beside the quays, and look forward to seeing you all there. Okay, so now I want to take questions. Generally speaking, the idea is that we let people speak for 2 minutes, maybe. Okay, so just to respect that there are other people who want to come in as well. So I'll start with Max.
I don't have a question. I just want to say, again, there's about like 5 seats here. And also, I was sitting in the back, and one thing that I think would help a lot is if you or one of you repeated the question so that people in the back could understand what you're answering. Because that was a problem for me in the back before.
Okay. Cheers, Max. Okay, so with one hand here.
Also, if other people want to answer, like there's loads of people and loads of squatters in this room, and if other people want to answer questions, I think that's great.
Okay. Crystal.
Thanks to both speakers, you're brilliant. If you look at, say, the squatting scene in the UK and the crackdown that the state has kind of done over the last couple of years, like, you know, there's lots of different examples. Have you put any thought into how the state are going to crack down over here as the squatting scene gets bigger, and how you are going to deal with that?
Well, we take a couple more, and then it gives you a little bit of time to think about them. Yeah, we've one more here. Yeah.
Just an extension of that. I know at the minute in London and Brixton, there's a campaign against gentrification, and it's something that's very apparent. I live not too far away, but I've been very familiar with the Manor Street squat. And I was involved in occupations in Belfast at the time of Occupy. We took over a bank, and we copied the example of the School of Ideas, or UBS Bank in London was taken over. And the whole idea was to, as well as pointing out the homeless or the housing question and the state and banks and all the rest of it, was to point out that area was all earmarked for redevelopment, Newfoundland University. And the question, I'm familiar with Grangegorman in terms of the relocation of DIT. I'm just wondering, I'm very impressed with the Barricade. I haven't been to it yet. I would like to see more examples of it. But in terms of having anti-gentrification struggles, in local working class areas being brushed aside, and sometimes, even notice this change of location from Liberty Hall, sometimes I do feel we play part in that, in gentrification, in terms of, you know, becoming part of that scene that's edging out the local working class community. So just to put that to the people involved in Grangegorman. Thank you.
Okay, and one more question. So you had your hand up there.
Yeah, well, it was kind of not really a question, more of a reply to what he was saying, and the second one as well. Like we were obviously talking to somebody about using the squat as an educational even for people, women who would mainly be from working class areas, like to educate about like, well, them and like them too. but like just educate ourselves and each other like about politics and economics and all these different things and how it would tie in like the like privatisation of the welfare state and of housing, like so like that's going to spread to those communities. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I've just come from an anti-racism discussion as well, and it was the same thing there as well. It's like if we can get those guys in to talk, you know, they'll come in and give us a talk, and it kind of just creates more of an awareness that we're all in this struggle together, you know, rather than, you know, these things being separated by these like imaginary barriers, you know. So like the more that happens, like the more these struggles will start to come together. But that's something that has to grow organically, I think, over the next couple of years, and it is already starting to happen. Like even like people like me being at events like this. Do you know what I mean? You wouldn't have seen it last year, so.
Oh, okay.
Anyway.
Do you want to take those points then?
Well, I didn't talk a bit about the first one, that I think I'm honestly trying not to think about it because I'm not sure if it's a definite thing that will happen, but I think there's a huge possibility, and it's kind of daunting even thinking about it. But it seems like from where we're at now, the best option we have is to kind of create huge networks of support for eviction resistance, and that means our friends, but also kind of getting more people in general all over the place to see squatting as a reasonable, rational thing, you know. And that means having like huge community support all over the place, so that when people are trying to evict us, we have like visible defense and support from all over the place, and it means that they're not going to want to evict us. And I think that like a really good example of that, which like obviously has a completely different context, but something to kind of look up to, is how squatting is seen in Spain. You know, is like when, for example, with Canvias last year? Yeah. They tried to evict. In Barcelona, they tried to evict a squat that has been around for 17 years or something, and there was like riots in the streets for 4 days, and they couldn't, and they didn't. It was still going strong. And like the first day of it, when they tried to evict them, they destroyed part of the building. But since then, they've done a huge like crowdfunding campaign. They got like tens of thousands of euros in, and now they're like rebuilding this whole space with like massive support from the community that like I can't even imagine, you know. But I think Grangegorman like suggested that that's possible in Dublin, and that's really amazing to see. And I don't know if other people want to speak about that too.
Jenny, do you want to come back in
on that one?
Yeah.
I think that we just pretty much covered it.
I think there's somebody there who has.
Okay, so we'll take 3 more questions then, or
I think it's a comment on.
Oh, okay, all right.
Just a little thing that popped into my head when you said that is, I think for a while we kind of enjoyed being kind of underground and like not really being that noticed by a lot of people. It is really different from the UK, where squatting's in the news a lot and like gets a lot of bad press, and like sometimes we would have journalists contacting us wanting to do a story on squatting. We didn't know really what to do with that. We kind of, personally, I was like, it's kind of cool that we're underground. At some point we're going to have to deal with this. And with everything that's going on in Grangegorman, it is becoming more apparent that if like we need to put our voices out, otherwise people are going to speak for us, and that's starting to happen more. And I think that's awesome that like people are doing like autonomous media. The stuff that happened around Grangegorman looked really good. So I don't know. For me, that's an important part of it that is happening and looks good. And thanks to people that are doing that, because I'm not.
Okay, we'll take another round of questions. So
I just want to say, I was talking to Dylan from Grangegorman a few weeks ago. He mentioned that the day of the attempted eviction, there was an attempted eviction, like I think 2 months ago, I don't know. Apparently there were around 200 people here just down the road outside it. And thanks to all the people, then the guys had to leave to do with something called the Bridge of Peace or something like this. But my question is more to do with NAMA. That Grangegorman place apparently is supposed to be part of NAMA, and apart from the NAMA, they say that they wanted to use the space for cultural thing. do you think that in the case of Grangegorman, this could be a way of saving Grangegorman? Because I don't know what's going to happen next month with the court hearing.
Okay, we'd take. So that was a question about NAMA. There's one.
I guess the long-term aspiration of anarchism / libertarian socialism in terms of housing is to have, whatever kind it can be of direct tenant control over living arrangements. And squatting obviously are a fantastic way to do that for two reasons. One, it does place housing directly in the hands of those who are being housed, and two, their squats are normally run by people with actual anarchist principles and with anarchist aspirations themselves. But also, would you be able to talk about other avenues that are perhaps less precarious and less in danger, on constant danger of being taken over by the police or being repossessed by the landlords and getting into legal troubles? Things like, say, housing co-ops or doing things like, say, campaigns to place publicly owned housing under cooperative ownership as opposed to either private ownership or public ownership, but rather to have them exist as a sort of a commons controlled by the actual tenants, and also perhaps linking that up with squatters' movements and making movements for housing co-ops more radical, and also linking them up to squatters' movements.
Okay, and just one more question at the back.
Like it's more of a maybe general comment rather than a question. I don't know if you want to hear it now or want to wait.
General comment, far right.
Yeah, I don't know, because like you guys have talked about loads of things, and it's sort of like reminding me of like a lot of my experiences as well. And I guess I'm not going to talk about it very much because you guys. Yeah, I do feel that, I don't know what happened with Grangegorman, created a huge buzz, and it was fucking awesome, and it was great to see loads of faces, and probably most of you are in the room, and most of you I don't know, but I know your face, and it's deadly, and I really, I don't know, I found that period was, really inspiring, and it was the first time in, the last 2.5 years that I've been spotting for that it actually happened, and it's sad that we needed to have, 50 heavy men just breaking into our house to have that happen. Well, I guess we're learning as we're going. I don't know, one thing that I feel like my experience of squatting has benefited me on a personal level as well. But now, because maybe we're underground, as you said in ago, or maybe that was just the buzz at the moment, or not being feeling free to say, oh yeah, I'm squatting. It's like, shit, the neighbours. Do you want to look okay? Yeah, how are you doing here? Visit friends, and it was just really awkward, and it was just really great to see the neighbours and seeing we support Grangegorman squatters and be like, hey, how's it going? And it just run after you because they know you're squatting, and it's really, really good. But I don't think that we should just think about that. And to me now, it's more important to feel that how can I see all of yous maybe not every day, but regularly enough, rather than us needing all of yous when we get evicted. I feel that squatting is more something that for me is just a sharing of experiences. I'm not just oh, my bike is broken, I want someone to help me fix it, but just how can we help people opening more houses, and how more people can help us opening more houses, because it's great to talk about housing crisis and shit like that. But I feel that we have the energy and we have the privilege to do so, because I don't have kids, I don't work, and it's great. I have all the time in the world, and I have loads of friends to do that. But what does a family in need for a house can do, and is there something that we can do? How can we be more open to people, and people be open to us as well, and create an exchange? I don't know, just even obviously it's really sad that Grangegorman's going, but there was a garden, and in my head this garden was going to grow loads, and people were going to take ownership over the land as well, because I felt that the problem with Grangegorman was just that there was a key to the door, and obviously you can't have everyone having a key, and it wasn't a social space, but it also was, and it would be really nice to see that people feel more connected to a space that we're squatting, and then it's not just squatters having an ownership over the place, but that everyone would. And I feel we're very still a fragmented community, and I just wonder how now that there are many places open, and there's the Barricade, and that we're sort of starting to know each other, how can we just come together and just put up like a huge action, we're just really all together because I feel this is how it's going to work. And we don't know much about the law because there hasn't been any there hasn't been any court case, and we just have it for Grangegorman, and we need more of them to know what we're doing so we can do more of that.
Okay, so that's 3. If you want to jump in on any of them, and then we throw back out again.
I'd just like to talk about, your question was basically what entering into negotiations with NAMA was that like...
Well, NAMA's supposed to have this idea of using the spaces for arts and stuff like this. That was, they sold this idea, no?
Yeah. Well, I mean...
I think I could...
Shane,
yeah.
I mean, yeah, like NAMA is supposed to like use some of its property for like social causes or whatever. This is like in the case of Grangegorman, they've already handed it over to a receivership company to basically sell it, and so this isn't going to be one of the cases where they use it for some sort of social cause. I don't see that as an avenue that we could go down to possibly keep the place. I think it's already happened that NAMA have handed it over to the receivership company. That's all happened already. I don't.
Okay. Do you want to come in on any other points? Anything that was asked?
In terms of other avenues besides squatting to challenge the notion of private property, I think that's a really good question. I think that's something that we should be exploring more. There's been a few times, there's a housing co-op thing, Radical Roots. I don't really know much about it, but I know that people have been talking about it a lot more recently, and they've been getting them to come and talk in Ireland. And I think that's a great way to get people more familiar with the concept of housing co-ops. I'm not really sure right now, because I haven't thought about it much, how we could connect housing co-ops and squatting, but I'd like to explore that more.
Okay, we'll take 3 more. And
I'd just like to make the comment that you were talking about going to the High Court.
Yeah.
And I sort of get a feeling that it's the end of it. It's not. We have the Supreme Court. Because if you lose in the High Court, it's your right. We have 4 courts.
Yeah.
It's your right to then go before the 8 judges. But before you go before the 8 judges, you go before 3 judges, and you can technically delay going to the Supreme Court for many years. So I think maybe a bit of technicalities on how to prolong the justice system might be of help to you.
Okay, we'll take 1 more here, or 2 more.
My question might be like a slight diversion, so if it's just don't answer it, I guess. Something that came up for me when you were talking was thinking about how maybe we don't. I really liked what you were saying about squatting, fundamentally for you and the people who you're working with being in opposition to private property. And I was thinking about how we don't have to necessarily be reclaiming abandoned spaces to gain autonomy over housing. And I was wondering if in the groups that you're networked with, if the idea of using some of the spaces you're involved with now as a base for a national rent strike has come up as a way to bring squatting into the discourse around the housing crisis. I'm really interested in talking about a rent strike. If anyone wants to come chat to me some other time.
Okay, and 1 more question then.
It wasn't a question, it was more a response to a few
response
things.
Then, yeah. Okay.
This idea of going to the Supreme Court, maybe that will happen someday with a space, but now for Grangegorman or something, I don't really see the point. The Supreme Court and the whole justice system and the cops are there to protect private property and capitalism, so fuck them, let's take spaces.
Yeah, it's just a way of delaying their eviction.
No, the eviction is going to happen on the 4th of May.
But if there is a big crowd of people, 300 people outside, they will not manage to do that.
Yeah, you want to be 300 people outside there for a few weeks? Be my guest. I'd rather just go squat something
there. Okay. Any other questions?
Well, I just
we're going to let people who haven't spoken before in first. But does any? Oh, yeah.
I think you're giving up too easy on the 4th of May.
So go down and defend it.
Yeah, I will. I think we should get as many people together and defend it, Because if you give up easily, then it's just like ask them to try just some more. Just keep going. You resist.
Okay. And one more point. Yeah.
Can I like direct respond to that, or
Yeah.
is this kind of going into like a rabbit hole of?
No, I think we should get more responses from other people. Because
Yeah.
we don't
Okay.
know much.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a chance they might come on the 4th of May, and so being 300 on the 4th of May would be great, and it probably won't happen on the 4th of May, but they could come at any time, repetitively, wear us down, train like the Eviction team on us, and it would just be like a drain on us for a space that we're gonna lose eventually. Okay, also just one quick point on like getting more people to squat. If you know anyone who wants to squat, or if you want to squat, or if you have questions about squatting, we have practical squatter nights every Wednesday from 6 to 8 at the Barricade Inn. So come to that.
77 Parnell Street.
You got the people at the back thing. They'll only wear you down if you let them wear you down.
Can I get a direct response to that?
Okay. Hang on a sec. No, there are other people who haven't spoken, and generally speaking, it's hand up first before you speak, right? Yeah.
If someone has an injunction against you on a space, they can just take photos if they want of you leaving the space and arrest you when you're going out to get like bread in the shop. Like if someone has an injunction against a space, there's not. The only way to defend it then is if you have like massive crowds and massive riots and stuff. I don't think that's going to happen with Grangegorman. The movement's not big enough yet, and it would really be a strain on people. And people have already been defending it and for a long time, and it's already worn a lot of people down. So I think it's better if we use our energy for new projects like the Barricade Inn and opening new spaces and trying to get more people involved, not just a subculture, but people who genuinely need housing in Ireland. And linking up with them groups.
Okay. Yeah. So you.
Just to add on to that, maybe I'm not supposed to talk about this, but I'm going to anyway. Just I think. Well, I think that we could consider resisting against injunctions in different cases. And I think that the reason people don't want to right now is, one, partially because the movement is maybe too young, too small, like not big enough right now, but also because there's a lot of internal conflict within Grangegorman, and a lot of people realistically have just given up and moved out because they don't want to be there. So that's another reason. I think that that's important to say because other spaces might exist where we do want to, like, there might be the same kind of legal situation where we have an injunction and we still want to resist, and we would consider that a possibility, but right now that doesn't look like a possibility for a lot of us for Grangegorman because we've given up on the space. Some of us, sorry.
Okay. Are there any other points or questions, comments, people that want to come in that haven't? Oh. Okay, yeah.
Really shortly,
yeah.
just like it's really awesome though hearing people being like, "Fuck yeah, we'll help you resist. That's great." And if you could just like conserve your energy until there's a call out.
Okay. You don't. It's don't have their hand up at the back. I can't tell because they're.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I just wanted to make a point about like, you know, if everyone resists, then they can't like kind of break you. But you know, people are. I don't live in Grangegorman, but I can just imagine like it's been such a busy, horrible few months for people living there that they're probably already drained. And if you can't, like, we need to, like, activists need to look after ourselves first and and you know, make sure that we are healthy and that like we practice self-care in order to still be able to like live and in such places and just be active. So I think like it would be amazing if people resisted and managed to stay there, but at the end of the day, like, people are people and you can't just you might ideally want to do that, but at the end of the day we all have complex needs and complex issues that mean that you can't always do what is maybe expected or wanted of you by the community at large.
Okay. Yeah, Shane, we have.
Just like one more thing about resisting or not resisting Grangegorman's eviction. Like, I've lived in Grangegorman more or less from the start, and like, I'm all for like resisting on the 4th of May, but that's easy because everyone knows that the date the 4th of May, you know, and I'm not sure if they'll even be stupid enough to come on the 4th of May. It's like, it's easy to resist on the 4th of May, but it's more that they can come at any random time after that, when, because maybe we could have a few hundred people there on the 4th of May, but we're not going to have a few hundred people there every time after that, and we don't know when the time after that is going to be. And so, like, if you're living in that environment, you feel like you're living under siege, like you have to have barricades up all the time, you don't know when they're going to come, and that's just something that's not very appealing to many of us right now, when we feel like we have the energy and the support to squat anywhere we want. So that's more what we're interested in doing right now. Okay, but certainly on the 4th of May, happy to resist on the 4th of May, but for like an indefinite period of time after that, not really.
Could you just sorry, what happened on the 4th of May? Just for people who don't know, what happened on the 4th of May?
Well, we actually have no idea what's going to happen on the 4th of May. The only thing that happens is the injunction comes into effect, which means that it's a criminal offence for us to continue occupying it. Okay. But whether or not that's enforced on the 4th of May, we don't know. We don't know if they're going to come with 1 million cops or with 2, or if they won't even bother doing anything. We don't know.
Okay, and we had a...
I didn't actually make the point that my original point was that the more these spaces are being used by, you know, like outside of, you know, this kind of community or subculture, the more they'll be seen as like, you know, physical manifestations of where we can meet, where these barriers are being broken down, and the more they will be defended. And even in regards to the 4th of May, sometimes like a show of strength, you know, is required, and like they might not turn up, but even like just that show of force will make a point. And I think maybe that's what we learn from the war on terror, just kind of like just having that show of force does work sometimes. But yeah, like, you know, letting people like us come in, you know, it is like turning those spaces into being from a subculture into, like I said, like an organic space where what is developing is allowed to grow. You know, we're all allowed to get together and like exchange ideas and stuff.
Can I just say with that as well?
Sorry, hang on a second. There's some there.
We never answered Holly's question.
Oh, okay, yeah. Jenny, and then we.
You were talking about whether or not it had been spoken about, like a national rent strike had been spoken about. That hasn't come up, but I actually think that that's a really great idea, and I would be more than willing to talk to you about that afterwards.
Sorry, you're going to come in then.
Yeah, just that sometimes with these sort of situations and struggles, there's this us and them mentality where we're all people and we all can reason and see that, yeah, it's a good idea to squat. And just to share a story from Madrid as well, is a friend of mine had opened up a school in Scotland, and they took 200 people off the streets and gave them housing. It was an amazing thing that happened. They had a library, they had a swimming pool, they had all the facilities of the school. And the police came around, and the guy who was leading it was a pretty reasonable person and talked to the guys, the police that came. And there was this change in attitude that happened with the police, and the police looked at what was happening, understood, and took the hand and walked away. And I just thought that was amazing. That they just said, fair play to you.
Where was that, sorry?
Somewhere close to Madrid, I'm not really sure exactly. But
okay. Have we any other questions? On the floor?
I don't know, I'm very kind of inspired by what's going on, so really great. I suppose I'm going to attend some of the Wednesdays nights, but I'm dying to know much more about squatting, and especially, I mean, I don't know how to actually, in terms of like, people are stressed out, you know, people are kind of having different complex needs, like it was mentioned, and I'm just wondering in terms of self-care, management, conflict resolution. I'm sure there is a lot actually to learn from, so that's what I'm looking forward. But would you mention some of the, I don't know, maybe that's I'm not sure, but it's questioning for the right kind of time, you know. So what would be kind of solutions? And also, you know, like when few people live together, it's always something, you know, what needs to be negotiated, resolved, decided upon, you know, so all of that. And I see kind of, you know, that there is something, you know, is there. No, I mean, yeah, from what I read, you know. So, I don't know.
Do you want to?
Can you clarify the question? Sorry.
What kind of strategies or what kind of approaches are used, you know, in terms of running, you know, such projects and housing kind of, you know, arrangements, conflict resolutions, things, people are stressed out, disagree, need just to be listened to, you know, all of that kind of, you know, how has it worked with
I think that, like, what a lot of people have learned from Grangegorman is that, like, you have to be, it happened very chaotically there, and a lot of different people moved into the complex, and, like, some of the groups couldn't really get on, and that caused a lot of stress. But what we've learned from that is you have to, like, the group of people you choose to squat with is way more important than the building you pick, and you have to have good, like, together groups that you're able to work with before you start living with them if possible, and that way you can avoid a lot of conflicts to begin with.
Can I just add to that?
Sure.
Also, I think in terms of like conflict resolution or processes for dealing with conflict, I think it's really important for everybody, and this. Or I think it's really important for everybody to have a basic understanding of the fact that like we're all fucked up in loads of ways, and that's due to the fact that we like grew up in these societies with these systems of oppression that are ingrained in us, you know. And so when we fuck up, which we inevitably will, it's kind of like understand, like not dehumanizing people for it, but understanding that like we're all capable of fucking up and dealing with that from that perspective, and that's a really difficult thing to do, because we're not used to it, because we're taught that like if somebody fucks up then they deserve to be punished, as opposed to like deserve to be given a chance to take accountability for their actions. And that's kind of a radical perspective of looking at dealing with conflict. And it's, I think processes for dealing with conflict will look different depending on the issue, depending on the circumstances. But I think it's really important at least to come from that perspective.
Okay. We might take maybe one more question and then throw it over to yourselves, just if you want to wrap up with any final thoughts then, okay? So...
just wondering, in Grangegorman, have you discussed or decided were you going to communicate publicly what you're planning to do or not do, or is there any discussion about that, like issuing statements?
For the 4th of May?
Yeah.
Well, it's complicated, I think, because of the internal conflict. A lot of people have stepped back, and I guess there hasn't actually been that much communication with the groups involved with what people are actually planning on doing. And I think that a lot of people have, because they've been so drained, have just haven't really even considered what their actual plan is for what they're going to do.
But I think if we did get a plan, we would communicate it publicly.
Yeah.
I mean, when we get a plan.
Okay. Just, do you have any final things you want to say to folks, or?
Aris does.
Can I talk really quickly for 2 minutes about something brought up a few times, the intersection of like squatting with housing struggles in general. Somebody talked about alternatives to squatting, that like less conflictual police and the rent strike and what's going on in the UK at the moment, and that is a real fusion of like the squatting movement with anti-eviction in general. Like there are evictions every day. The reality for like a lot of working and unemployed people every day is evictions, police. Like whenever we're in court for a squat thing, there's like 200 repossessions going on, and when we're like going down the street, we see people getting chucked out by their landlords. And what's going on in the UK at the moment is a real joining up of like anti-eviction work, which usually before these groups were doing squats, to resisting evictions of people in private rented accommodation or council accommodation, and using our kind of tactics of like show of force, solidarity to prevent evictions from happening at all, and to negotiate like these people need alternative accommodation, these people need their deposit back to be able to get another place, and I think that's really important because the crackdown that's going on at the moment in the UK is completely like interwoven with a crackdown on everyone. Like, people are becoming homeless, their housing benefits being cut at an astronomical rate. There are so many more people becoming homeless, and the real social welfare in society isn't benefits, it's being able to squat. It's like if you lose everything, you're out on the street, you can still go and find a place and sleep there. And that is what they're trying to criminalise at the same time as forcing people out onto the streets. And I think it needs to be taken on as a thing.
Really tiny point. Someone brought up like stuff about conflict resolution and facilitators and mediators and stuff. If any have those skills, then we should be friends, because sometimes we need like independent mediators or like people to give workshops on facilitation and stuff. And I guess go over to the Barricade Inn and like tell them if you can like help us in any of those things, or like we can link up, and that would be great. Those things are great.
Okay. In that case, then I just want you all to thank Jenny and Zoe for a fantastic talk and introduction to self-organising and squatting in Dublin. Okay, so thanks. Okay, that brings us to a close of all our speaking panels. We've done a lot of thinking today. It's almost time to dance.